Hello again, Jed Irvin here, and in this next video in our series about how to stay in sync with your advisor, today's topic is something I call the abstraction gap. Now, this is a term I came up with to describe a particularly tragic flavor of a student and their advisor getting out of sync. Now, during a typical meeting where you're working out a research plan with your advisor is speaking in concepts. They're at this high level of abstraction where they're speaking to things like mathematical underpinnings, or how this algorithm compares to that algorithm, or here are the building blocks of this algorithm and how they fit together. They're not speaking in pseudocode, and they're not speaking in code. Now, it's the student's job to listen to all the abstract discussion and map that into a concept about how they can implement that in code. So ideally, they understand everything that the advisor says about the high-level plan, and then they can go off and implement that. Now, how is it that a student can wind up not comprehending everything about these concepts? Well, I can think of three reasons. One is just a basic misunderstanding where something is said and the student thinks they understand it, but they don't really understand it. They have the wrong concept in mind. Another reason is that maybe there's just a language barrier where the student and the advisor aren't really communicating at 100%. And so there's a lot of inference about what is being discussed. The third reason a student might not catch everything that's being discussed at the concept level is that they're distracted. How can they become distracted? Well, there's a lot of ways, but what I'm going to speak to here is the notion of footing. I covered this previous video that you may have seen, but in case not, I'll cover it briefly here. Typically, when a student comes to a research meeting, especially when they're just starting out, they are in what I call first-person footing, which means that they are mostly concerned about how they are doing. Maybe they're worried about what the professor thinks of their performance, or they're worried that they'll be able to get as much done as the professor wants and stuff like that. This is in contrast to what I call collaborative footing. And that when you're in collaborative footing and you go to a meeting, you're just as concerned with the integrity of the meeting as you are about how it's going for you. So what do I mean by integrity of the meeting? Well, things like, did everything get discussed that needed to get discussed? Did everybody get airtime that they needed? Is the meeting about to run long? Is anybody watching the time? Stuff like that. Now, when you're starting out, it's just too much to deal with all that. And so it's very natural that you'd be in first-person footing. But in first-person footing, with this distraction, you just might miss something that's going by. Or you catch enough of it that you think you can fill in the blanks and you fill them in the wrong way. Some research projects can be more prone to this abstraction gap problem, and that is when they have terms that are overloaded, that are used in more than one context. Now, the worst I've experienced is when the word network was involved multiple times. There are different types of networks, perhaps even at different layers of abstraction in this project. And when people are talking about the various aspects of this landscape, they don't always remember to qualify the word network with which network they're talking about. And so the person speaking knows they're talking about this network, but a person listening might have been thinking about a different network, and so they might try to map it into there. And if everybody's unlucky, that mapping can actually work. And so they think they're talking about something else and they start getting off page. So you can keep an eye out for this happening and take special care to always qualify when you have these overlapping concepts. Now I'm going to tell you a story that I call scary but true, something that actually happened on a project I was working on. So this was a big project, an interdisciplinary project. There were two teams working together, Each team had a professor and a bunch of students. I think 3 students on one, 4 students on the other. Very smart people in the room. A few of the people had very good collaborative footing. And we had a meeting and stuff was discussed. Stuff was worked on. The next week, had a meeting, discussion, more work. Third week, meeting, discussion, more work. On week 4, somebody just happened to ask the right particular question, which exposed this major rift in understanding that showed that for 3 weeks, we were carrying on with very involved, detailed conversation about theory and implementation, design, and we weren't talking about the same things at all. It was very humbling. And the reason it didn't come up sooner is because this was something where the implementation was taking a long time. It's not like we had a deliverable each week where we could see if the software was doing the right thing or not. This was like over a longer period of time. So this is really something that can creep in even when you're watching for it. You have to really take some actions to make sure that this doesn't happen. And we'll get to that in a second. But let's ask the question, whose responsibility is it to watch out for this? Is it the professor's responsibility? Well, the professor, remember, he's speaking in these abstract terms. It may be the case that he's more grounded in theory in general. Maybe it's been a decade and a half since he's done any coding at all. The student has to catch those concepts and write code that implements them. So they have to bridge the gap themselves. So it makes sense that they should be the ones to watch out for this problem and make sure it doesn't happen. It really is in your best interest to make sure you don't waste a week implementing something that's not exactly the right thing. So how do we do it? How do we avoid this? Well, the best way I've seen so far with software is for the student to generate pseudocode that represents the logic that they are supposed to implement. So if they generate pseudocode and it's clear enough in a layer of abstraction that the professor can understand, then the professor can review that and make sure that everything lines up. And I've seen this happen a lot where pseudocode is generated and issues are found and fixed, which is what you want. Now, typically, there isn't going to be time during the meeting to generate the pseudocode. There might be, but often these meetings want to run long. Why do research meetings want to run long? It's because you're thinking into new ideas. There's so many new ideas. There's so many things to think about. It's often the case that you only have a little bit of time at the end to make a plan because there is so much discussion ahead of time. So more than likely, what'll need to happen is that you'll need to say at the end, okay, I think I got the plan. I'm going to cook up some pseudocode and share it with you just to make sure we're on the same page. And then you go off and do that after the meeting. So to finish this off, I'm going to share one last thing. So there's a saying in woodworking, carpentry, that goes like this: measure twice, cut once. What is this about? Well, if you're measuring out some wood and you're going to cut it and you don't measure correctly and you don't check it and you cut it, you've cut the wood and you can't uncut the wood. So you've wasted wood. I want to apply that same concept to software development in this research environment. And really, this applies to any collaboration in any environment. And what we do is we change measure twice, cut once to communicate twice, implement once. So I think that's worthy of going viral. I just came up with it a few minutes ago. I think it's awesome. So take it to heart. Communicate twice, implement once. If you get the plan right, the chances that you're going to be able to build the right thing, they just go up. They go way up, right? So, all right, I think that's enough on the abstraction gap. Just do everything you can to not fall in there, because you do not want to waste a week. Believe me, I've seen that happen many times. All right, we'll see you in the next video.